folks. You're listening to the Jobs Podcast. I am your host, Tim Hendricks. Your time is valuable. I'm not going to waste it. Let's get right to the interview. Hey, folks. You're listening to the Jobs Podcast. I am your host, Tim Hendricks, and today we've got a special treat. For 26 years of my career in the fire service, there have been multiple voices on the other end of the radio. I have a lot of respect and admiration for these folks. 911 dispatchers, they do not get the credit they deserve, and a lot of people don't quite know what goes on the other end of the line. So I have Keith with us today. He's been a 911 operator for a number of years, and he's going to let us know what the job is like, and we'll get these folks the recognition that they deserve. Hey, Keith, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you today?
Doing good, thanks. So let's go ahead and get right to it. Tell us a little bit about where you were born, your upbringing, and your education, and kind of how you ended up in dispatch.
All right. Well, 41 years in a short, simple, sweet story. I was born November 1983 in the beautiful city of Denver, Colorado.
Oh.
And the second of three boys. We lived all throughout the United States during my upbringing. So after I was born in Denver, moved to New York, Louisiana, Tennessee, over to Ohio, then back to Colorado in a suburb of Denver. It's called Longmont, which is just outside of Boulder, if you're familiar with the area. And then lived there for about 6 years before I moved overseas. And then I lived in the Netherlands 6 years. My parents ended up living there for 8 years. But yeah, so I spent most of my childhood moving around, living in different places, traveling, seeing the world, and then living in the Netherlands. Graduated from high school over there, came back to Denver, Colorado to start my undergraduate career at the University of Denver. Spent about 2 to 3 years there. Decided to transfer to Missouri State after I wanted to be closer to family. We had a death in the family that kind of rattled us, so I wanted to be closer to my family and be closer to everybody. So I started Missouri State and then finished my undergraduate career. Right around that time, it was the 2008 financial crisis. So no one was hiring at that point. The economy had pretty much collapsed, and everything that I was trying to do, jobs were pretty much non-existent. So I was just trying to do some menial jobs just to make some money, do what I could. And then I decided that I was going to get my master's while I was also working, because a lot of the things that I had been reading basically said, to get yourself a leg, you needed a master's degree. So I started my master's degree. I got my undergraduate in political science from Missouri State, and then decided to go into the Master of Global Studies. It's kind of like international relations. And I got that, but government jobs, or federal government jobs, they still hadn't rebounded. I had applied a number of times to join the Foreign Service to become a diplomat. Basically work at a U.S. embassy abroad, work for the State Department. I always could get to the final stage. I mean, as you're aware, in any sort of government job, whether it's local, state, federal, you have different stages of the job application that you get to. And I always got to the final stage, but I could just never get past that. And so I had a little moment where I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I didn't want to move because I had a young family and I didn't want to uproot everybody from where we were at. And so I was just looking for something local, saw that 911 was hiring, and I looked at the job spec and the pay and figured it would be a good job to at least get and keep for the time being while I kept my options open. And fast forward 10 years and I've been working there since, and I'm now a shift supervisor. So it's definitely not a traditional path to becoming a 911 dispatcher, but one that I think a lot of us share, that, very few of us actively seek to get into this job. I think a lot of us kind of stumble upon it accidentally, but we all share kind of the same same goals that we have, or same mindset that we like of, service, especially public service, helping the community, being a part of something bigger than yourself. So it's definitely been an interesting path getting to where I am right now, for sure.
What types of education, if someone just said, I'm going to set out, I want to work in dispatch, I want to be the 911 guru, what types of training or education? Is it a national kind of a certification, or is it state by state, or how would that kind of play out?
Well, so first, so each different 911 agency is unique. So you'd have different state levels that kind of gauge how much training and certification you need. And then nationally, there are some national standards that certainly apply. So we have APCO, which is the Association of Public Safety Communications Officers. It's kind of like a national board. We also have NENA, which is the National Emergency Number Association. So those are kind of two national level organizations that kind of bring everyone together and kind of work top level issues of, okay, we look at call answer times, how fast we want to process things, certain questions that we need to answer. But each state has its own set of guidelines that they require. In terms of educational background, just in terms of the job qualifications, you need to have a high school diploma. You don't need any sort of advanced degree, or even a bachelor's degree. It certainly would help, though. And the reason why I say that is the world of 911 is definitely changing. From the first 911 call that was made in the 60s on a landline to now, where over 85% of our 911 calls come in from cell phones. The world is rapidly changing. And a lot of 911 is still trying to be in the shift from the analog age to the digital age. So if you have any sort of background in technology, whether it's radio communications or even someone who's done military service and they've worked on radios, they've been on the radio. We actually had one of our dispatchers become an Air Force officer, and she actually became an officer and worked some of these Air Force communication planes that fly at high altitude, and they're the ones that are establishing ground communications and air communications for the entire U.S. Air Force. So there's a lot of technological side that you could do, but even just having some critical thinking, the ability to think on your feet, to rationalize, to have that kind of ability to think and learn and grow. Those are some of the skill sets that we look for.
I remember when I got into the fire service, speaking on the radio, communicating with brevity, precision, being succinct in what you're trying to convey in as few words as possible was something that I wasn't used to doing. Do you find a lot of folks when they come in after they've been there for a while, they start to get more efficient with their communication with the general public and each other?
Definitely with each other and the general public. I think oftentimes the communication that we give emergency type situations is not the same type of communication that you would give on a normal basis. So, when I'm asking my wife how her day is, I want, beginning of the story, the middle, the end, the ups, the downs. But like you were highlighting, in emergency communications, I need the important stuff to the point. I'm going to direct the conversation a little more. I'm going to use very direct language. It's
Mm-hmm.
not us being rude. It's just we have units en route, whether it's fire units en route for a house fire or someone who may be suffering a medical emergency versus enforcement who may be confronting a suspect that has weapons. We need to get that information quickly and be able to convey it in a manner that other people in the dispatch center can know and understand. So the way that 911 kind of works is whenever you dial 911, you'll speak to a 911 professional, And the first question we'll ask every single time, where is your emergency? Because if we don't know the where, we can't send anybody. But at least if we have a where, we can at least figure out, okay, something's going on at this location. Then we start asking our more direct questions of what's going on, exactly what happened. And then we're able to write some notes, code the call based on what's going on, and then enter it into our CAD system. And CAD stands for computer aided dispatch. So when I enter a call for service, I'm typing notes in a computer program, and then it goes to the correct dispatcher to send out a unit. So it could go to the fire dispatcher, it could go to the law enforcement dispatcher. And so I need to make sure that I am translating effectively what the caller is giving me, typing it out very succinctly, and then entering it in to where another person can be able to read that and tell what's going on without having to be on the phone. And then they, in turn, are relaying that information to the units that are en route. So succinct, clear, direct communication is something that we practice daily. And it oftentimes can get forgotten once we're just having conversations amongst ourselves when things aren't going on, or we can have a moment of, downtime, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're so used to that type of communication that it can be hard to switch off and switch on from time to time.
Do you, aside from the 10 code that I think law enforcement still uses, the fire service, we don't really use that. It's just pretty much just simple, straightforward speak. Are there codes that you use when you're typing information in, or do you type it how you would speak it, straightforward and direct?
So one of the things that you learn whenever you start 911, and each agency is different. So our agency at Springfield Greene County 911, we practice what NIMS and ICS really preach, and that's simple, clear, direct communication.
Mm-hmm.
No use of 10 codes or any sort of other codes. And for those that may not know, NIMS and ICS is the Incident Command System, and NIMS is the National Incident Management System. And one of the things that it found, especially during 9/11, one of the problems that hindered the ability of all these agencies to work together and coordinate together after a major incident was you had all of these people who weren't able to effectively communicate to each other because one agency had one meeting for 1040 and
Yeah.
another agency had another meeting for that same thing. And so it was hard for them to speak. So what NIMS and ICS recommends is that you use plain, clear, direct speech. And so that's what we use at 911. Now, there are other organizations in the state of Missouri that use 10 code still, and that's fine. But I still have to ask, when I'm on the phone with Missouri State Highway Patrol and they give me a 10 code, I have to ask, I don't know what you mean. Can you explain that to me? So that way I can make sure that I effectively communicate that to my dispatchers or whatever units are going. So we are very much for plain, direct, concise speech. And I think it helps because then everyone's on the same page. Now, we do use certain codes, but that's just more for alerting law enforcement that they're in the presence of someone who may have a warrant or be a person that they don't want them to hear the radio traffic. It might indicate to the officer that that person is known to be violent or known to be armed or something like that. So we do those, but other than that, we just use direct speech.
When you are new, what position does the rookie, so to speak, start in 911? Is it just an observational position, or do you throw them to the phones and trial by fire thing, or how does that play out?
So our training program that we do at Springfield Greene County 911 is roughly about 800 hours of training.
Okay.
And they start off the first week as just kind of an onboarding new hire orientation where you go over some paperwork, you meet with HR, you do your benefits enrollment and stuff like that. But you're also learning about the different positions, what you do, some call types, things that you're going to hear out on the floor without actually having to listen to the phone calls yet. And then your second week, you're learning the computer system. And that's an entire week in and of
Mm.
itself. So you're learning how to navigate CAD, how to navigate through the entire program, how to do things, how to type things out so that way we understand it and the units and responding also know to understand it. And then after that week, you sit with a trainer on phones. The phones are the first thing that you get trained on at our agency. Some agencies, they have you do law enforcement and then kind of ease you into the phones. But with us, as busy as we are, we need people to know phones from the get go. And the phones is kind of like you're learning multiple things. Number one, you're learning how to take a 911 call, how to use skills like active listening, to pick up on the subtle nuances of someone's speech, to see, is what they're telling you sound like something that's what's going on. So, for example, someone could be telling me that there's a person that's there with a gun and threatening them. But if I notice that their speech is very calm and very just nonchalant, that's going to raise a question and be like, okay, well, who is this person to you? What, explain the situation a little bit more, because it from how they sound isn't really matching with what they're saying. And so I have a little more.
That wouldn't be normal human behavior, which would raise a red flag, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
So you're learning the kind of tools of the trade, being able to take the 911 calls. Not only that, but you're also learning our policies, procedures, and the policies and procedures of 9 law enforcement agencies and 13 fire protection districts that we dispatch for.
Shoo.
So there's a lot of stuff that you need to learn. So, like, one of the major examples is taking routine medical calls. So if someone calls and they want an ambulance because they have a broken toe, well, depending on where they are in Greene County, fire rescue will go. So Springfield Fire won't go because it's part of their response that they go for high level medical emergencies, stabbings, shootings,
Mm-hmm.
someone's not breathing, they're unconscious, stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
some of the outlying areas, fire rescue goes on every single call. Doesn't matter. If they want an ambulance, fire rescue will go. But then there are some of those fire agencies that they're like, well, we kind of want a little bit of both. And so you have to know a lot of these different policies and procedures, and you learn that by doing and taking these calls and making these small mistakes that your trainer can then correct you on immediately, and we can make sure it's not going to delay any sort of service or make sure that people aren't getting their ambulance in time, or getting the help that they need quickly. You do that for about 200 hours, and then once you've kind of gone through, and we do daily training evaluations on everyone. Every day that you're in training, if you sat with a trainer, they're going to do an evaluation on you. And it's basically just saying what I observed, how you did, ways you can improve, and things you might need to work on. Once you get all acceptable and you've done that consistently, we'll give you the go ahead and you'll be released. So you'll be a call taker for a little bit. And then you go through some of the other positions. And so at our agency, we have this PD admin channel where you learn how to read warrants, read vehicle information through Department of Revenue. Like whenever an officer pulls someone over on a traffic stop and they check the vehicle registration, make sure it's not stolen, or they run your license plate to make sure, or I'm sorry, your driver's license to make sure that you're a valid driver, all of those sort of things. And then after that, you PD dispatch. After that, you do county and muni, and then there's fire dispatch as well. So in total, about 800 hours worth of training that someone goes through. So it normally takes about a year for someone to, from the time they hit the floor till they're fully cross-trained, it's about a year. So it's a long process, and we invest a lot of time and effort into training.
What age do you have to be to apply and work in dispatch? Is that department different, or is there a nationwide standard?
Generally, it's 18.
Okay.
So you need to be 18 years of age, and I believe that's primarily because you're handling some sensitive information,
Yeah.
and you're legally adult at that point. But most of the time, I want to say that whenever we get new hires, I think the youngest one that we have currently, they're about 20, 21 years old.
When your trainer is sitting there with you, are they on a headset where they can hear what's the information coming in and then they can hear your response, or are they just waiting for you to ask them questions, or how does that kind of look?
Yeah, so they definitely have a headset on, and they are hearing everything that you're hearing, and they
Okay.
are able to hear everything that the caller is saying, and plus their trainee.
Okay.
And so when you start off, you're going to be listening to us and seeing what we do, and we'll explain some things and kind of help build you along. But ideally, by the end of day one, we want you talking and typing on your own to
Okay.
start the process of building that confidence and making those mistakes, because mistakes are crucial to learning. you know you need to fail in order to, and we have the ability. So back when I first started, it was just it's called a Y cable, where you plug in and you're kind of separated, and I could flip a switch to where they would be muted, and then
Hmm.
I could speak if I needed to take over. And there were and
Right.
there were times when I was in training, and when I've sat with people in training, that you need to kind of kick over because the call's not going the way that you need it to. Maybe the caller's telling you some stuff that's not really important, or we need to get them transferred over to EMS, or we need to ask specific type questions because we have law enforcement on the way. Whatever the situation might be, we have the ability to kind of butt in, so to speak. But as they progress, we're doing that less and less, meaning that you're more independent on your own of knowing when to ask certain questions, what questions are relevant for each call. Like, for example, if someone's calling in a parking complaint that there's a vehicle parked in a handicap spot and they don't have a handicap placard.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't need to ask if that about weapons, or if the person's intoxicated, because generally speaking, it's just a vehicle. So versus if there's some sort of domestic disturbance or assault that occurred where we're sending law enforcement, I need to know, are there weapons involved? Does anybody have any injuries that I might need to start an ambulance to? So being able to know and ask those call type specific questions will build throughout the time. But yeah, we're right there with them. We see the screen that they're working on, we hear what's going on, and we can gently nudge them on what to say, how to say it. We can interject when we need to, but it's definitely, we're right there, right next to you.
I would imagine that somebody that's new to this, they may not understand quite the assault on your senses when you first start answering 911 phone calls. People in certain emergencies, they're losing their minds. It's the worst day that they've ever had, and they're calling you for help. That can be overwhelming to someone who's new. Do you find a lot of folks, it's a shock to them initially and then they settle in? Or do most folks go into it knowing, expecting, okay, this is going to be a lot and I'm going to have to soldier on?
So, it's kind of a mixed bag. There are some people who fully know and fully expect what's going to happen, but you can have an idea, but it's different living through it. Like, I'm sure you're
Yeah.
well aware of, going through training, working a motor vehicle accident. They can tell you these are the type of things you're going to see. These are the type of things that you're going to have to do when you're out there. And when you're out there, you're doing a job that's particular to that motor vehicle accident, but there's a person in there that's, possibly, unconscious, and, they're fighting for their life, and, but you still have your job to do, and your job is an essential part of the entire process. So a lot of people, they know and understand, like, people genuinely 99.9% of the time don't call 911 just to chit chat.
Yeah.
It's because they're having an emergency. And more often than not, this is the worst emergency that this person has had in their life. It could be a loved one collapsed on the floor and they're not breathing. And so hearing that and being that calm voice on the other end and guiding them through that and being able to give the level of care and compassion while also knowing and understanding that this is your job and you need to be the calm one, it definitely can throw people for a loop. I've known some people who started off and they were really good at call taking and they were really good at their jobs, and they got about 75% of the way through, and they just said, look, I can't do it. I thought I could, but I can't go on. And that's fine. There are a lot of times, a lot of things that we hear on the phone that stay with you for a long time. There are calls that I have very distinct memories on going back 10 years. I could tell you exactly where I was on in the building, what phone console I was talking, the address of the incident, you know, and they're being able to recognize that it's their emergency and being able to compartmentalize
Hmm.
initially, but then also recognizing that we need to be able to take care of ourselves and our mental health, because there is an old adage of just soldiering on, and there are people who do soldier on, and that's just who they are. But I think more and more people are recognizing, and especially at the state level, more and more states are recognizing that 911 professionals are first responders, so we can get some of the level of care and mental health resources that some of our other first responder brothers and sisters get with like EMS, fire, and PD as well.
I'm
So
glad to hear that.
I'm very happy that the state of Missouri has recognized 911 professionals as first responders, and
Good.
I think it's long overdue. I always joke around and say dispatch is always the redheaded stepchild when it comes to the public safety triangle of police, fire, and EMS, so to
Yeah.
speak. But we're very much in it. And not only that, but if you look at the the life cycle of a call, you on the fire rig, you can respond out to a very bad motor vehicle accident, and you work the scene. You get the person extricated from the vehicle. EMS takes them off. You stay on scene working with PD to get the road cleared, and then you go back to the station. You can have a debriefing. You can put yourselves out of service. You can do some things and meet initially. PD can kind of do the same thing as well. They're working the scene. They're getting the vehicle off the road. For us at 911, I hang up that call. Another 911 line's ringing. Boom, I got to answer it. And now it's a mother with a baby that's not breathing. And so the onslaught of stuff that can happen, it's very real. And I don't want to try to scare people away, because that's not my intent at all, because it is a very fulfilling career. And I've been able to meet some very amazing people and talk to some really awesome people on the phone. And I couldn't imagine the last 10 years of my life without working at dispatch. But I also need to recognize that, you know, being able to, work through a lot of these high priority calls, it definitely is a wear on you. And if you're not aware of your own mental health and your ability to work through things and deal with things in a productive manner, it definitely can wear on you for sure.
That's some solid advice, and that is one of the big reasons that pushed me to do this podcast in the beginning, is that when you look online or on YouTube or whatever for jobs, you see all these, oh, you can make this much, and this is the great thing, and here's a perk, and here's another benefit. But they gloss over sometimes the real negatives. And every job, I don't care what it is, has positives and it has some negatives. That's just the nature of life. And you're absolutely right. The word onslaught, I can see that being a perfect descriptor of your job. When our call is over, sometimes we'll go to another one if it's really busy, but a lot of times we just go back to the house. And yours, you hang up and there's 3 more calls waiting for you, and it's just on repeat. And I can see that if you're not prepared for that, it could be a bit much. So this is the kind of stuff that benefits the listener. So I'm really glad that you explained all that.
Yeah. No, I truly believe that through knowledge and being able to discuss parts of the job. Look, there are times where 911 gets just, we get burnt out. We feel like it's just so much stuff because when you're in public safety, there's a lot of negativity that you deal with because it's just the nature of what we do. Again, no one's calling 911 because they want to just chit chat and tell you, hey, you're doing a great job today. I appreciate you and your service. And so being in that, living in the muck, so to speak, can definitely wear on you. And so you need to constantly be reevaluating, what is my why? And for a lot of us, it's because we love public service. We love helping people. We love the community that we live in. We love working for an agency where people are highly skilled. And I would stand next to these people on the front lines like we do every single shift. So it's something that you have to constantly be looking inside and recentering and figure out your why, because it's easy to get lost in that. Because if you're just looking at the tunnel and you're trying to find the light at the end of the tunnel, sometimes you don't see the light. And that can be a very scary place, especially for a new person, and especially for not only that, but especially for someone who's been there a long time. Maybe they think their light is never going to come back. And, that's just not simply true. We just need to be able to, look at ourselves through training, through resources, be able to recenter, refocus, retool, and understand what is our why. And I think a lot of us are able to successfully do that. So I am definitely for full transparency. And one of the things that we actually do whenever we're going through the hiring process, we have people, uh, whenever they whenever they take some of the initial tests to see if they've moved on to the next stage. So one of those first stages, they take a typing test to see if they meet the minimum qualifications for typing. I want to say it's about 40 words a minute, but don't quote me on that.
Okay.
And then they take a test called critical, where they're using short-term memory, recollection, to see if they could follow a map or if they can remember the license plate or the number, the description, and they're kind of like mock 911 calls. One of the things that we do is we do an info session where we explain everything that goes on. We explain our shifts. We explain our vacation structure. We explain what 911 calls are actually like. And we have them sit on the floor, listen to 911 calls for a period of time. And we want them to write down what they observe. Is this something that you're still interested in doing? Because a lot of people, again, they want to help their community. They want to do public service. But after listening to some 911 calls, they're like, you know what? I might need to find a different avenue. And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we definitely give everyone an opportunity to see and hear what it's like on the floor before they've even been uh, given the offer to work for us.
These mock calls that you were just talking about, is this something where they have a headset on and they're actually doing the job just in a simulation type thing?
Uh, I would say kind of.
Okay.
So it's not a mock call where you're talking to someone. It's basically someone talking, and you can hear them give information, and
Okay.
then it'll ask a series of questions on whether or not you can retain some of that information. So the person will give a description of a person walking away from a vehicle, and then it'll ask what color hair did they have, what jacket were they wearing, what direction did they walk, to see if you can understand cardinal directions, and it's also map reading as well. So I say mock 911 calls only because you're getting information on a call, so to speak, but it's not like a live 911 call, so to speak, that actually played out on the dispatch floor.
Okay. The two questions about kind of the nuts and bolts of your day-to-day job. What length of shifts do you work? And then what is is there a typical dispatch type schedule nationwide? Like in the fire service, we got 24/48s, 48/96. There's a couple other oddball ones that only certain states use, but those are the two that you see the majority of the time. How do you typically run dispatch?
So we have 9 different shift start times throughout the day. And then we're kind of weird in that smaller agencies, they normally do 2 different shifts of 12 hours.
Okay.
We at Greene County 911, we have roughly 65, 68 people on the floor. And so we try to space those out throughout the day and then throughout the week. So some people, we are scheduled to do 10-hour shifts due to short staffing. And sometimes we often work 12s and some people will work 14s. I've worked 4 14s in a row and I would not recommend it. It definitely takes a toll on your body for sure. Yeah. I mean, I like the added paycheck with the overtime and stuff, but
Sure.
there's a point where you're physically and mentally being run down. So, but yeah, we're normally scheduled for 10-hour shifts.
Do you
And
have sit stand desks? Do they have that option now to be able to alternate?
yeah, we have
Okay.
desks that we could raise and lower and sit and
Okay.
stand. I try to stand as much as possible, but there are
Sure.
times where you just need to sit down.
Yeah.
So a normal telecommunicator will come in and we have an app on our phone. It's called in time scheduling, and we can basically see where we're sitting throughout the day. So depending on how many positions you're released at will depend on where you're sitting. So your day could have some phones time, it could have some law enforcement dispatch, some fire dispatch, and you can kind of switch in between. There are some people who they like to remain where they're seated, so they'll say, "Hey, I just want to be phones for 10 hours." More power to them. I can't do phones for 10 hours. That definitely takes a toll on you. But there are some people that absolutely like it and prefer it. There are some people who like law enforcement dispatch, and they'll try to sit there 10 hours out of the day. So it just depends on the day and whether we have some extra staff or some staffing shortages where you get to sit. But you do a 10-hour shift. And then, like I said, if we have someone call out sick or whatever, and we have some staffing shortages, we'll have mandatory overtime that needs to get filled. But for me as a supervisor, so my day is a little different in that I need to be in charge for generally 6 hours of my shift. And so I'll be on the floor for 2 hours. I'll be in charge for about six, and then I'll end my day uh, on the floor. And so what being in charge means is I'm basically the one running the entire floor, making sure the phones are getting answered in a timely manner. If anyone has any questions about policies, procedures, or anything like that, I'll be the final say on what to do. Making sure that radio communications are working, making sure the CAD is working optimally. We have IT staff and we have admin staff there during the week, but that's Monday through Friday, normal business hours, 8 to 5. So whenever it's after that, or if it's weekends, you know, like when I was a night shift supervisor, there was a period of time where I was by myself, and if there was any sort of radio issues or anything, I had to be able to diagnose them and get them back up and running again. So it definitely adds a different flair to your day than someone who's just working the floor.
So everyone in your basically room where all the people are at, they can work any position. They're cross trained to do anything, but then there's some flexibility to kind of focus on fire or PD or EMS or what have you.
Well, yeah. So depending on what positions you're cross trained for,
Okay.
will affect your ability to sit. So, like someone who just got released on phones, they can only sit phones, so they're going to get scheduled 10 hours of phones a day.
Okay.
It's not fun, but whenever they are consistently showing that they can do the job, and it usually is about a month or two, and then they will move on to training on different uh, radio positions. So they usually either start on fire dispatch or the SPD admin channel. It just depends on who else is training and what shift we can move them to, because it's kind of like a weird balancing act trying to get someone trained and get them quality training, but a lot of times you need stuff to happen in order for them to be trained. So like the overnight hours generally probably isn't a good time to train someone on fire dispatch, because we generally have less calls that fire goes out for overnight. I say generally, but you could have those weird days where we had a tornado that ran through southeastern Greene County, and I think it was like north central Christian County. And so we had to send LR fire out to a number of, possible house fires or structures that collapsed, and, things were crazy. Or there was a January, I can't remember how many years ago it was, but this January we had heavy rains for about a week. And so it was just, we were getting flooding like crazy. And this is back when the fire dispatch used to be two separate ones. So Springfield Fire had their own channel, and then County Fire had their own channel.
We call
So I
those the
was,
golden years. I remember that. It was a lot
right.
quieter in the firehouse back then.
Yes. Yeah. So I was on County Fire, and I personally dispatched over a 2 hour period 65 water rescue calls.
Good grief.
Yeah, it was insane. And so, I had to basically triage every single call that came in, and dispatch, you know, was our caller in the vehicle that was now being submerged in water or being taken over by floodwaters, and so I had to be able to go through that. And there were some that were duplicates because a person had just been driving by and they saw a vehicle. Well, when there's floodwaters, you're not able to get the vehicle towed
Right.
out from, so they tried their best to mark it with tape or something, but a lot of times they were duplicates. But being able to raise, or understand that that was a vehicle that had already been checked on, but this person is calling from the vehicle that's getting submerged in the floodwaters, and dispatch them out. Yeah, it was crazy. So you definitely have those days where we say it's like drinking from a fire hose. There
Yeah.
are there are days where you're just trying to make calls happen, and you're like, for whatever reason, nothing's happened that's fire related. But then you get those days where, it seems like a house fire pops up, and then another building fire pops up, and then, Springfield Fire goes into response mode one, and then you got another building fire that pops up in the county. And so things just kind of cascade from there. So whenever it rains, it pours over there. But yeah, it definitely can get hectic for sure.
Now I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. All right. How many coffee pots do you have going at one particular time in dispatch?
So we used to actually have, and we still have these. We had a bun coffee, or still have a bun coffee maker where you could make the large carafes of
Yeah.
coffee.
Mhm.
I used to be the one that was continuously making those, just because I love drinking coffee. I'll drink coffee all day, and
Yeah.
I can fall asleep right afterwards. It's no problem for me. But we've definitely gone away from that, and now people are more doing the individualized style, like K cups and stuff. So, but
Uh,
the amount of time that people do the coffee breaks and stuff, or running to get more coffee, or whatever, happens a lot.
let's talk about potential earnings. Now, I always preface this by saying that the starting wage and how much you can make is very market dependent. You live in New York, you live in Los Angeles versus Springfield, Missouri. You're going to have a pretty different starting salary. But what do you know? Is there a kind of a general industry standard, or is it really where you live?
Oh, it is 100% driven by where you live.
Okay.
100%. So, one of the things that we actually used to do when I worked overnights, we just would look up random 911 jobs in other places and just see comparatively how much they made. And I can't remember what place it was in Southern California, but it was fire dispatch only. So you were just a fire dispatcher, and your starting wage was $120,000 a year.
Hmm.
But when we looked at the comparative cost analysis of Springfield, Missouri, we made more on a comparative basis than they would out there. So it's, I would very much caution anyone just looking at the sticker price, so to speak, of looking at the dollar sign, because it's very much region or even locality specific. So where we're at, we are constantly looking at agencies in the surrounding area and dispatch centers of similar city size in other states to try to figure out what is a fair market value. And we always are submitting information to the city so that way they can kind of update their figures and see if they need to do another staffing study, or if they need to kind of look at the pay scale and figure out how much it. But so starting off, I want to say new dispatchers earn about 40,000 a year,
Okay.
and that in and of itself is also dependent on, if you work more. If you work more overtime, you'll definitely make more. If you work a different shift, you get shift differential pay. So, and we have a special, so we have a very odd shift that no one wants to work and no one likes to work. But we've just found that we need this block of time for people because these are generally like very busy hours, which sounds counterintuitive. It's 1 a.m. to 11 a.m.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like an overnight mixed in with a little bit of a day shift. So recently we were able to get it passed to where whoever works that shift gets a special shift differential of an extra $3 per hour. So it definitely is very not only dependent upon what agency you work for, but also even what shift you work for inside of.
That would be with a full benefits package as well, health and all that kind of stuff.
Right, right. Yeah. So
Okay.
a lot of times, and things that I've seen, most agencies have your health insurance premium that they cover.
Okay.
It's just whenever you start adding family members and stuff on that, you'll pick up that. A
Hmm.
lot of times they do tuition reimbursement program. They do other perks and stuff. I've even seen some dispatch centers have hiring incentives of, if you're fully, or if you have some experience and you are moving and you work for one of these agencies, they'll do like a $2,000, $5,000 lateral hire program,
Okay.
kind of as an incentive. But so definitely varies. But for us at Springfield, Greene County 911, start off at about 40,000 a year, but then you go up and you can make. I mean, it just depends on how high you go in terms of your career laddering, but it
Okay.
also depends on how much you work. So it's definitely and depending on what you do. So like our trainers, we have a special position for them. They are our lead telecommunicators, and their primary job is training people. So they get an 11% bump on their pay that normal telecommunicators don't get. And so we also have it's called a PAT scale. It stands for Professional Administrative Technical Scale. So it can start off, depending on your years of service, you're starting out at step one, and then by the time you cap out, you're making 20 or $30,000 more per year than when you first started. And then depending on each agency, they do yearly cost of living adjustments depending on each agency and stuff like that. So, but it's very much region locality specific. And not only that, but it largely depends on funding. One of the ways that 911 was funded was through sales, or not sales tax, landline taxes. So whenever you had a landline cell phone, it was a tax that was added to each locality that was able to use that money for 911. But as landlines have gone the way of the dodo bird, and more people are doing cell phones, a lot of agencies have been facing budgetary shortfalls because they're not reaping the benefits. And so a lot of agencies have switched from the traditional income structure like that to doing dedicated sales tax. So at Springfield, Greene County, 1/8 sales tax is afforded to 911, and that is a non-expiring sales tax that yearly goes to us, and that's how we get our funding. So
Hmm.
it you know it's great because especially in this area, there are a lot of people that live outside that travel into Springfield for various things. They work here, they may travel here for business, they may come here for other things. It's a regional hub for a lot of stuff. So it definitely has helped us in terms of the available money that we have. And ultimately, the amount of money that you have coming in determines how much you can pay your staff.
Sure. What types of soft skills, you've touched on a couple of them throughout our conversation, but to sum up, what types of soft skills will, when you have somebody that's new and you look at them and you go, they've got it. I think they're going to do well versus folks that I'm not sure if this is the right fit for you. What do you see in the successful ones?
I mean, the biggest one, I think, is the ability to think on your feet. 911 calls, they can be very routine, but they can also present some challenges because you can get a situation that you really haven't quite had before. And so you kind of have a general idea of what to do, but then being able to think on your feet and use your knowledge, your tools that you've been given in order to come up with an answer that best fits that type of situation. That really, really helps because if you've shown the ability to think, rationalize, make those quick, effective decisions, even if you make a mistake and it's not the correct one, it can be changed in a very quick and efficient manner to where it's not going to result in any sort of delay.
Right.
So, one of the things that we're always talking about is, and especially with new people, is as soon as you get a brief idea of what's going on and you have a location, get the call entered because then we have something that we can do with it. And especially on medical calls or fire calls and high priority police calls, like if someone's been shot, stabbed, or something like that,
Mhm.
we need to get those calls entered because literally seconds matter.
Right.
Whether the fire crew gets out there in a timely manner for someone who's bleeding out is a like 5 seconds is a very long time. And, if you think about it as well, if we're delaying any sort of response, we're not getting out the information in a timely manner. And so our units that are responding don't have all of the necessary information to know and understand what they're getting into or what they need to prep for. And so being able to make these effective, quick decisions and really be able to think on your feet, but also have the rational thinking skills of being like, okay, I haven't had this quite yet, but it's got these certain parameters, so I need to go with this call type for the fire call because I think that would make the best response. So one of the things that I always try to rationalize with our with our new people is, and most of our calls for service, it's roughly about 65% law enforcement related. So whenever I try to teach someone about how I approach calls, is the priority level and how many officers respond. Because if an officer is potentially going into a dangerous situation, you don't want to send one, I want to send two, at least two. And then not only that, but the call priority. So it's a little different for fire because as soon as you guys get a call for service, we send it. But law enforcement, there are calls that can pen for a while depending on what the situation is. And so I always try to rationalize, is this priority level correct? And are the correct number of officers going? And so, by teaching our new people how to think like that and think in terms of what a response type would look like, I think they're able to effectively differentiate the lower priority calls versus the higher ones and be able to think, okay, this is something that we need to send more units to. So I need to make sure to bump this up in priority or make sure that it gets dispatched in some of your lower priority calls, which could be like a parking complaint or something that's just, you know, um, a moving traffic violation or something like that.
You're just
So,
triaging in a different arena. Really,
yeah,
it is
oh,
triage.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, fully, one of the things that I tell people who are on the floor observing before they get hired on, 911 is an ER just in a different setting
Yeah.
because we are literally taking in the calls, figuring out what's going to be the highest priority, who needs to go, and where. That's what you're doing as a call taker. You're coding the call with a call type. So whether it's a house fire or a possible motor vehicle accident, you're coding the call, you're sending to the units, you're getting the information to the people that need to go, and knowing and understanding. If you walk into the ER and you have diarrhea, let's say, or some other non-critical ailment, just know that you're going to be there for a while. And that doesn't mean that your ailment isn't important or it's not going to get handled. It's just there are times where we have to have the doctor see someone who has compound fracture or someone who's been shot or stabbed because their life is on the line. So it is 100% accurate to say that we triage calls like an ER for sure.
Yeah, if nobody's paying attention to you, that's a good thing when it comes to emergency response because you're stable, you're fine. And sometimes we have people that don't realize I'm not over here holding your hand because there's other people that are way worse than you. So count your blessings. I'll be with your paper cut here in a second. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So, what types of personalities do you typically find in dispatches? Are they mostly extroverts, introverts? Is it a good mix or is it kind of really irrelevant to your occupation?
So, one of the things that we actually try to do at our agency is we have our new people take a personality test.
Oh, okay.
And we have a mentorship program that we do, and we try to pair up our new person with someone who matches their personality type. And so it's a really great way to provide mentorship, some a person who just be there and listen to the trainee and not be in a role that's, I'm training you, but I'm here to listen. I want to know how your progress is going. So I just kind of check up on you and make sure everything's going fine. So I recently had a person who became fully cross trained, and we were the exact same personality type with one exception. So she was an INTJ and I am an ENTJ. So she was the introvert version of me.
Hmm.
And so we definitely get introverts, we definitely get extroverts. But I would say more often than not, the people who stick around at 911 for a long time are your type A personalities, your
Yeah.
go-getters, your people that want to do things, are their own worst enemy. They get inside their head a lot. no amount of criticism that you can give me is going to be worse than the amount of criticism that I can give myself. The people who really strive to do good, put in the extra effort to learn and grow, and that's great. But on the flip side of that, it just means that we can burn ourselves out faster and harder. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Hmm.
So, being able to recognize when it is okay to pull back and when it is okay to accept that constructive criticism and know and understand that it's okay to fail and tomorrow's a new day and we'll try it again. So, we definitely get a lot of type A's for sure. Introverts, extroverts for sure, but definitely type A's. That is a predominant trait throughout in any sort of 911 profession and across the United States. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what agency you go to, it's definitely a type A. Now, I will say, having that many type A's, it can definitely lead to some spirited discussions
Oh yeah.
amongst each other.
Yep.
And, there's definitely a source of conflict there for sure.
Uh-huh.
But we ultimately are all brothers and sisters in the same family, and you
Sure.
work for these people and you see them more often than you do your own families at times. So it's definitely a family familial kind of setup where you have your brothers, your sisters. There are times where you love them and you're like so proud of them, but
Yeah.
then there are times where you're just like, I need to get away from these people.
Yeah.
I need a vacation.
Hmm. What types of technological advances have you seen in your time? And I know that this could probably go on for an hour in and of itself because with GPS and mapping and satellites and everything else under the sun, it seems like technology is in any occupation anymore. But specifically in yours, the the cell phone you were mentioning earlier has been a common thing. And are you able to triangulate where people are calling from? If maybe they can press 911 and get you on the phone, but they can't communicate? Are you still able to find them? Or what other kinds of things have you seen in your career that have made 911 more efficient or better overall?
So, like you said, I mean, cell phones in and of itself has sent 911 ahead by light years compared to the landline. Because before it was just landline, so you had to physically pick up a phone that was connected to the wall
Hmm.
and dial 911 and then speak to a person. Whenever you called on a landline, your 911 center got the information of your phone number and where you were calling from because those were the two pieces of information that were communicated to 911. Now people are calling on cell phones, and so we get the phone number that you're calling from, and depending on the cell phone technology, it's called a wireless phase one, which is basically the tower that your cell phone hit off of, which gives us a good-ish location, but it's not accurate in terms of where you are specifically.
Okay.
But then we can get what is called wireless phase two, where we basically send information to the cell phone, being like, "Hey, give me a better location," and that sends out cell tower triangulation. So we get a better location there. So what is happening right now is definitely revolution of technology in 911, and it's called next gen 911. So a multitude of things are happening on the 911 level that are literally gonna, like how cell phones took 911 light years from the landline. Next gen 911 is going to take it light years from just the regular cell phone.
Hmm.
So first and foremost, if you think of just general location of what a cell phone can tell you, it gives you a two-dimensional plot on a map. It does cell tower triangulation, and it can give us an approximate location of where you're at. Not only would NextGen 911 be able to tell you the specific GPS that your phone is telling you, so I can know within 5 meters of where you specifically are at, but it'll also tell me three-dimensionally where you're at
Oh
and
wow.
why that is important. So maybe not for Springfield, Missouri, because we don't have a lot of buildings that have a number of floors. But in a place like New York City, a place like Las Vegas, other cities that have multi-level high rises in the city, it tells you the altitude. And so it'd be able to determine they're on the 42nd floor. And that information is so crucial. If you think of, I hate to cite a tragedy like Mandalay Bay shooter, but one of the things that they really could not figure out is the elevation at which this person was shooting from.
Yeah.
But with 911 calls coming in, they could take that information and say, okay, hey, with next gen 911, this person's calling on the 32nd floor or whatever floor, and they're hearing gunshots like it's close. So, you know, being able to use that information and send units to, something like that in a more quicker, efficient manner, that's lives saved, in a major type of emergency. Another example, if you have a structure fire and someone's stuck on the 42nd floor, but they don't know where they're at. And if we're able to determine, hey, there's a person on the 42nd floor based on what their cell phone is telling us, we can direct units to that floor and say, hey, there's a person who's surviving in there. We need to try to get them out. How can we get them to a place where first responders are at to guide them out of the building safely?
Hmm.
So that is a huge one right there. But then not
How,
only that, but I'm
well,
sorry,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
ask, how soon is that going to be live? Is that something that's a couple of years away or a year away, or is it being implemented now?
So we've been in the process throughout the past couple of years of getting the necessary technological requirements, the licensing, and all that stuff to build up to where we can make it live. And each agency is different, and
Okay.
so we're hoping that within the next 6 months to a year, Springfield Greene County could be have next gen 911. So one of the other things that we also have a multitude of resources. So there's a company that's called Rapid SOS. And so they piggyback off of 911 systems currently in place, and they can tell us information about a cell phone, where it's at, the cell carrier, and use its active GPS to tell us sometimes within 1 meter, which is 3 feet,
Hmm.
of where this person is at. Not only that, but there are other pieces of technology to where if a person is lost out in the woods, they were on a nature hike and they got lost and they don't know where they're at. And for whatever reason, whenever they're calling 911, we don't get good information because there's only one cell tower in the area. I can initiate a text to them where it will allow me access to their camera and to their GPS data to where I can locate them to, again, within 1 to 5 meter accuracy, and guide them on where they need to go and how to get out, or what they can do to be located.
Wow.
So there's it, and with that, we'll be able to see and hear a lot of stuff what's going on. So if someone chooses, they can call 911 via FaceTime, and they can show us what's going on, the motor vehicle accident, or the incident that's occurring, and have access to all of that. And that in and of itself is, you will have so much more information at our fingertips to be able to get the necessary resources to people where they need it most. And that's just going to be the tip of the iceberg. So we're right on the cusp of this kind of technological revolution with 911, and it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. But on the flip side of that, one of the things that's definitely concerning, that for people that work in 911, they've said, I've had to hear it my entire career. I don't necessarily know if I want to see it. And so then it becomes an issue of,
Yeah.
okay, well, can we blur it out. Like, so there are some programs that we have access to where it can blur out stuff. You have access to it, but I don't necessarily have to see it. Then the other question is, well, what if there's something of evidentiary value to law enforcement? How do we store that? How do we get it to them in a manner to where they now have access to it? So there's a lot of questions still to be answered, but yeah, we're definitely approaching some new ground in 911 in terms of technology to where we're going to be able to get resources to people faster and quicker because of next gen 911, which
What
ultimately which ultimately is the goal. We want to be able to get any sort of enforcement, EMS, or fire response to a person quicker because that saves lives.
One of the things that I'm curious about as I was listening to you talk about the live stream thing that where you can see is then it seems like the next logical step with that technology is if a fire crew hops into the fire engine or a law enforcement officer gets into their patrol car, they're headed to a call. They may be familiar with the building because the fire department, at least my department, I think most are pretty good about pre-planning. You go to the buildings, you do a walkthrough because you don't want to show up to a fire and this is the first time you've seen the inside of this building that's 3 blocks from your firehouse. But
Right.
I'm curious if there's going to be the ability to parlay some of that information over to the or forward it to the responding apparatus to where I can see, okay, we've got this huge house. The fire is, on the CD corner, or it's in the upstairs bedroom or downstairs. Is that something that's been discussed?
So I believe as soon as we have access to it, it would be part of the CAD record. So you guys
Oh,
would be able to you you wouldn't be able to. I don't think you would be able to watch it live as we do, but to be able to, have it in CAD to where you could see still shot, or if someone, because if someone texts, they can text 911 right now, but if they text in a picture and it's of a house fire, that could be part of the CAD record where you can see, okay, it's on the CD side and there's definitely flames showing. So
yeah.
instead of waiting to get there and calling it a confirmed working house fire, let's go ahead and start those additional resources that we need because we already know it's a house fire. And so I think it'll afford agencies, it gives agencies more information before they even arrive on scene. And so they can determine what the best course of action would be. And again, the ultimate idea is to save lives, it's to minimize the risk of property damage. And if we can send the most apt kind of resources to people that fit that particular situation, that, that's a win every single time.
Yeah. This line of work that I guess you could say you stumbled into it. It wasn't where you were initially planning to go. But as I listen to you, I can tell that you've found your groove and you're good at what you do. What advice would you give to someone who's looking at this career? If, let's say, it's outside of someone officially coming in and saying, I'd like to know more about this job, but your neighbor comes over and says, Hey, Keith, I was thinking about doing what you do. What do you think? What would be the first key pieces of advice that you would give them?
The first piece of advice I would say is be ready to accept failure. And that's not something that a lot of people want to hear because what we do requires failure so you can get better at what you do and be the best version of yourself. And so a lot of people aren't willing to accept failure. And it sounds counterintuitive that in something where there are such high stakes, that we would accept failure. And it's not a failure of accept the outcome of failure, but know that failure is a step in the process of getting it right. So that would be the first piece of advice that I would say is to know that you're going to fail, and that's okay, because through the process of failure, you will become good at what you do.
Hmm.
The second thing is have thick skin. You need thick skin. And that's not to say that you need to be able to not find a way to release a lot of the stress and the negative aspects that come from the job, because there certainly are a lot. Dealing with emergency situations, it can burn a person out really quick. But being able to know that this is that person's emergency, it's not mine,
Yeah.
and separating that out and still being like, I can provide the best customer service, the best care, the best level of compassion, and do everything, but no one understands it's their emergency, it's not mine. To where you're not internalizing it, because that'll just burn you out even faster. So that thick skin is definitely needed, because again, it's emergency type situations, but there are people that are less than friendly when they call.
That was, yeah.
I know it's a big shocker there, but
Yeah.
there have been times where I have been cussed out. I've been called names. I have been told that I am worthless.
Yeah.
I've been told that, I'll end up killing someone by the end of my shift, or I'm glad this wasn't a real emergency, or else I would have already been dead.
Right.
So you have to be able to understand that what this person is going through is their emergency. It's not mine. And a lot of times when people are in situations like that, they lash out. They'll say things that they don't necessarily mean or
Hmm.
whatever. And it doesn't mean that it can't affect you as a person, but to know and understand, and to um, be able to just have it be like water on a duck's back. Just let it roll off, and not even not even get into your psyche at all. I mean, being able to do that is huge. And then also, final thing of being able to accept, like I said, the failure, but constructive criticism, because there are people, for whatever reason, they just they 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 think constructive criticism is tearing you down. And it's like, no, I'm not trying to tear you down. I'm highlighting where you as a person can grow and learn and become a better version of yourself here at 911. And as long as people know that, I think they will be immediately set up for success.
I think sometimes constructive criticism, the recipient doesn't realize that the person delivering it, I care enough. I want you to succeed. If I didn't care, I would just let you fail and then you'd be gone and I wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. But I want you to succeed. So I'm giving you this advice. Stop looking at it as you're getting chastised, and I'm trying to help you be successful. I
Right,
think that's a lot of times the message is lost because of they're focusing on I'm in trouble.
right, right. Or I got yelled at because I did something wrong.
Right.
And I remember I gave a trainee a very lengthy evaluation one time, and they were right on the cusp of being released. And the training manager at the time had asked me to sit with them, because they weren't sure whether they should be released or if they needed some more time. And the training and education manager knew that I was really good at documenting things that people needed to work on, and also do it in a manner that was not deemed as like fixating on all the bad things.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a very lengthy evaluation on this person. And after my observation period, I, I recommended that they spend more time in training. And I had a very lengthy conversation with the person. And I said, this is in no way, shape, or form a mark on you as a person. This is not me saying you are a failure. This is me spending, like you said, my time documenting highlighting all the things that you did well, highlighting the things that you need to work on and grow on, because I do care and I want you to succeed. And I feel like in order to succeed, you need to work on these things so that way we all succeed. Because as cliche as it sounds, you are as strong as your weakest link. And, I don't want anyone stepping out onto the floor thinking that they are the weak link, because then you get into your own head a lot. You can make mistakes, and, it's hard to come back from a major mistake at 911, like just personally. There are some people that, they make a mistake and it eats them up and they can't do it anymore. So we try to put people in a position where they are hitting the floor ready to succeed, and being able to have the understanding that they're to take it professionally, not personally. I think that is a huge thing for them to have.
Yeah. You know, Keith, when I was making a list of all the occupations that I wanted to interview, the 911 operators or dispatchers, whichever term is the more current one, you were on that list pretty quick because, like I said at the beginning, I've been in the fire service for 26 years now. Most all of the people that I've talked with in dispatch, I've never personally met, but they've always been there. And when you've got a house fire or a medical call or a car wreck that's just going sideways, I speak from experience, and I know that I speak for a lot of other people when it's really nice to have someone on the other end of that radio that knows what they're doing, that's calm, collected, and is ready to help in any way that they can. And I'm very grateful to all the dispatchers out there. You do not get the credit that you deserve. But I know full well if you go to any firehouse or go up to any patrol car and ask the officer or firefighter, what do you think about dispatch? You're going to get rave reviews. And I don't think we've communicated that enough to you. So I, for one, thank you very much for everything that you do. Thanks for always being there on the other end of the radio. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share what your career is like. And I'm hoping I can highlight that for other folks and get you some good candidates.
Well, thank you, first and foremost, for reaching out to me.
Mhm.
And, it, it, it's weird how we can work so closely with people amongst the other agencies. Like I said, 9 law enforcement, 13 fire protection districts. I know, you know, on the law enforcement side, they sign in by their names. And so I can see what radio number they are that day and their names. A lot of them I've never met. And just like how I've never probably met a lot of people with, on the engine company at Station 8, or, or
Mhm.
Rescue One or anything like that. But the amount of care and compassion and dedication that we all have to making sure that we put you all in the best possible scenario for success, because ultimately we feel responsible for whether or not you guys and gals go home at the end of your shift, and we definitely want that to happen. So, it's very much likewise, where we appreciate all of you and what you guys do. But it's so funny how you can work an entire career and never physically meet someone, but you can
Yeah.
talk to them every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something unique to our line of work, but and
Very
and
much.
you can be honest, you like dispatching for fire more than you do police, right? I mean, that goes without saying.
You know, it depends. There are times where I'm on top of my fire dispatch game. There are
Yeah.
times where I feel like I'm on top of my law enforcement game. I like, just me personally, the SPD admin channel. I like the kind of busy work of confirming on warrants, the stolen vehicles, kind of the getting, providing like the kind of supplemental stuff on the back end that you do for law enforcement calls. But honestly, I love what I do. So it doesn't matter if I'm sitting on fire dispatch, or if I'm, dispatching law enforcement, fire personnel, or if I'm in charge and I'm, the the conductor of the on-floor operations and making sure everything's like, I love what I do. And I think being there for any length of time shows that you love what you do. I mean, there are days where it's definitely more trying than others, and there are days where you kind of have those, you know, people that walk you back from the brink kind of conversations because it seems like Murphy's Law is in full effect, and you're like, what am I doing here? I'm worthless today. I can't do anything right. But ultimately, I love what I do, and I'm so very fortunate to work with some very amazing people who love what they do, and they share the same kind of mindset and mission of helping people out. I mean, because ultimately that's what it boils down to.
I know my next shift, I'm going to be listening for you, Keith. All right. So,
Well, I'll have to sit fire dispatch because
all
we,
right.
we so whenever we do training, people are training there all the time, and then people like to sit there for overtime, so they get to pick where they sit when they're on overtime. So if I actually get assigned fire dispatch, it's a rarity, but I'll look forward to hearing your voice on the other end.
All right, man. Thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it.
All right, not a problem. Thank you.
Uh huh. And that wraps up another episode of the Jobs Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully, you found that interesting. As always, I wait until the end of an interview to ask you to like, subscribe, and share. I feel it's important that I earn that support from you. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.